Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Ethos Online. Again, this is a space where we can be, belong, and become the very best version of ourselves. And so, as we continue journeying through these books, through these ancient texts, we just want to remind you that you can partner with us. Not only can you share each video that we're doing, we want to build that YouTube channel as well as other social media things we do, but we also want you to consider, as the year closes, as we begin to move toward tax season, please consider giving, partnering with us financially, and we'll give you some links to follow there as well. But we just want to thank you for walking with us through this really in-depth study that we're doing currently over Genesis. And so wherever you're from, whether it's California, Idaho, Michigan, wherever it is, we just want to say thank you for joining us today. And so, as always, we're about to delve into a text. We've done the deep work. We've asked questions of the text. We've asked who the audience is, what date, era this was written, what the words mean. We've done all the deep study. But before we do, we have questions that come in periodically, and I love to try to answer them as time allows. Obviously, this book, Genesis, has taken us a while, and answering all the questions kind of takes some time. But today, I think we'll have a little bit of time. So I'll delve into the question that was asked just recently. And so I know there's a lot going on in our world, in our nation, and that has a lot of people buzzing. Especially people who have viewed the Bible in a specific way. And so one of the questions that was asked just recently, a couple of weeks ago, was this: do you believe the U.S. is in the last days? So this is a loaded question, of course. First off, I think we have to consider how to view this concept of last days. So we've talked about this a little bit in the past, right? Revelation. How do you view the book of Revelation? Is it a book that essentially is pointing forward, right, to thousands and thousands of years later? Or was the book much like Genesis, written for a present, current people who were going through something that needed a very present message? And after delving into it, then we can apply to today. So that, that's been my perspective. I like to view the Bible from the Bible's perspective, from the author's perspective first. And so the idea of last days is really interesting, but only interesting and responsible if we look at it from the camera, the viewpoint of that time. And so last days, what that is a reference toward, of course, in Revelation, as well as when you look at different Old Testament verses about different kingdoms, different empires, the phrase here, last days, always referred to the last days of a certain reign of an empire. And so when you look at Revelation, of course, last days was a reference toward the last days, the era, the time left in Rome's empire of rule. And so last days, of course, connected to that idea. So they were looking for, when are people going to be free? And so in the last days of an empire, we know historically from Rome to Babylon to Egypt, those last days are always really chaotic, right? Anyone that's done any kind of study in empires and the cycles they go through know that you start with different warring with different factions. There's splitting apart of different nations. And what you have is at some point in time, there's an established rule or idea of how to politic, how to order the world. And so after this, of course, the ordering takes place. There is a time, of course, of peace. There's a time of plenty, right? This is what most empires will go through. After that time of plenty, we know that historically what you get is you begin to move toward entertainment. You begin to build larger military. You begin to build your walls, your borders. This all takes place in empires. Every empire since from Babylon until now. Right? And so after this, of course, you begin to move toward entertainment begins to dominate. Everything begins to weaken. And before you know, infrastructure will fall. Right? And so if you're looking at ancient times, as Rome and Greece, as they allowed entertainment to become their pinnacle, they began to get weaker and weaker as a nation with values. You could argue, you could make an argument for back then their military was weakened. They began to relax on certain things. When that took place, there was an enemy that always came in and essentially destroyed that country. right? They came in and the country falls, the empire falls. The last days then would mean that in-between stage before an empire would essentially collapse. And so the question many people are asking right now, in America, of course, is there's inflation going on, right? We have certain things taking place politically. All of this is happening, right? And so the question I would ask is, have we seen it before, right? Have we seen this before? Have we seen inflation take place? Well, we kind of have, haven't we? Have we seen certain things with politics that we agree, disagree with? Have we seen nation divided? Of course we have. The question is, has it gotten to a place where so much momentum, so many things are going to happen that the nation might collapse? I don't know, right? I'm not an economist. I am not. I can't make those predictions. Those are simply predictions. What I can say is we can be aware of certain things our nation's going through, right? We can prepare in different ways, but we can also have conversations, and we can also choose not to get super bogged down in the fear that's spreading like crazy. Right after a pandemic, after certain various inflation happens, after crazy amounts of spending, all these things happen. The question is, where will our people be? How will we respond? And for me, the answer is always found in, what does Jesus do? What is Jesus' message over and over again? For me, I see a message of there's hope, even if the empire collapses tomorrow, right? There's hope, there's reconciliation, there is community. And so what I'm choosing to focus on, instead of making grandiose predictions about what happens here and now, what I'm doing is I'm choosing to believe that community, I'm choosing to believe that community, family, relationship, those are the things that's going to sustain us, right? And if you want to buy an extra little bit of rice and beans, go for it. Right? But do I believe the U.S. is in the last days? I have no idea. Historically, every empire will at some point not be number one anymore. Is this maybe where we're heading as a nation? Maybe. I don't know. Let's find out in the next couple of years. Maybe, maybe not. Either way, I'm choosing to walk with community through it all. Right? And so I'm not going to choose to let the Bible be my odd prophetic book that's pointing forward, that I'm having to, mathematically figure out weird equations and signs and times and all that. I'm not going there. I'm going to allow Jesus' message of hope, restoration, community, love, forgiveness. Those are the things I'm choosing to focus on now. And so, do I believe this? I don't know. I'm not sure. I think time is going to tell. And I don't know if that's a great answer or not, but it's the one I choose to hold on to. So, moving forward, let's step into the book of Genesis. So Genesis, again, we know this was not a book written for future tellings or even historically perfectly accurate details, right? This is not a history book. So we know this. And so we know it's not a history book because, again, it was written 587 BC after the fall of their temple, right? After the Israelites are taken captive. And so it's a written response to the fear of assimilation, right? What will happen to our people? Will we forget who we are? And so they compile all of the traditions, all their values. They put it all into this one piece: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. We call this Torah. And so we stop looking at the Bible as this idea of a perfectly told history, and we look at through the lens of, what does this say about Israel? And what can I do to apply it to me today to make me a better human being in my community? And so Torah is a complete narrative of Israel miniaturized through its tellings. It's a really, really beautiful compilation. So today we move into chapter 24. And we're going to go verses 1 through 23. And there's a lot here, but there's a lot of recap. There's a lot of things I want to move through rather quickly, but there's a really beautiful point I want to share out of this one section. So let's work through it together. We're going to move through a couple verses here and there, and I'm just going to point out interesting tidbits you might want to be aware of. And again, I would argue it's more important than ever. Read through this chapter first, maybe hit pause, read through it first, and then I'm going to take you through it. So maybe hit that pause button now. Read through chapter 24, 1 through 23. 23, and I'll be right here. So do that now, and we'll be back. All right, so here we go. Verse 1 through 4. Let's read this together. Abraham took another wife, and her name was Keturah. And she bore him Zinran, and Jokshan, and Medron, and Midian, and Jishbak, and Shua. Those are some doozies. And Jakshan begot Sheba, and Dedan, and the sons of Dedan were Ashurim, Letshuim, Lihum. Lots of fun words, right? Lots of fun names. And the sons of Midian were Ephath, Epher, Enoch, and Abida, and Eldiah. All these were the sons of Keturah. So, one word here, one name I think is important. And oftentimes when you read through rabbinical writings, this word here, Abraham, right? His wife dies. So he takes on another wife, right? And this would have been very commonplace for the Hebrew people, any tribal person in general. And so the word here, Keturah, what this word in the Hebrew means is a concubine. Yeah, they had concubines. This is true. And so the name there literally means concubine. And so she helps him continue build up his empire, right? Even larger, which is really what this first section is essentially pointing to. The promise that his people are going to number the stars, it's coming to fruition. And it continues even after his wife dies, right? It continues with this concubine. And so because of this woman, Keturah, his people are going to continue to thrive. It doesn't die there with Sarah. So let's continue on. Verse 5 through 10, let's go. And Abraham gave all that he possessed to Isaac. There we go now, right? We move back to Isaac. So again, if this was a literal telling of history, you can notice that they're kind of going back and forth, which would be how they would have written back then, not how they would write history. So keep that in mind. So Abraham gave all he possessed to Isaac, which would have been the tradition of the time. You give everything to the son, you pass down what you have. And to the son of Abraham's concubines, Abraham gave gifts. Now, again, you didn't have to do this as the founder, but he chooses to, which is really kind of beautiful in that era. They would have said, Abraham is a good man. So he gives them gifts, and he sent them away from his son Isaac while Abraham was still alive, eastward to the land of the east. And these are the days of the years of Abraham's life that he lived, 100 years and 70 years and 5 years, right? And Abraham expired and died in a good old age, old and satisfied, and he was gathered to his people. And Isaac and Ishmael, his sons, buried him in the cave of Machpelah, in the field of Ephron, and the son of Zohar and the Hittite, which faces Mamre. And the field that Abraham had brought from the sons of Heth, there Abraham and his wife Sarah were buried. So, a couple things. Eastward, right? Back to Eden, right? Back toward the place of shalom, wholeness, nothing missing, right? Home. Really kind of a beautiful idea here about when you begin to face death. The idea that it can be faced with courage, and it can also be faced with peace. I think in this time that we're living right now, we have so many people, they just want to keep living, prolong life, when the reality is when you get to be that old, today we want to prolong it, and we think, is the life that you're living worth living anymore, right? When you're 90 plus, are you living a full life? Maybe, maybe not. But back then, they faced death courageously. They were not afraid of it, right? They said, I have lived a good life. I don't have the regrets. Right? I'm going to live this fully and enjoy it fully, but when my time comes, I face death not as a thing to be feared, but as a friend I walk with. Right? It's a beautiful concept. And so 175 years, right? Many people will take that literally. The idea, again, it's pointing toward the fullness of life. Did he really live 175 years? Probably not. Right? Probably not. This is probably not to be taken literally. The idea in Jewish writing, he lives the fullness that life could give. More so, 120 would have been like the pinnacle. He goes beyond that. Again, they're trying to say Abraham was a phenomenal human, right? Walked with God. That's the bigger picture. So, and lastly, the cave of Machpelah. This is a family cave. This is where he would have been buried with his wife. And it's actually, back in this era, you would have been buried with all of family. And so you rest with family. right? So in death, he faces it courageously. He's lived a full life, and he's going to rest with his community. That's the beauty here. That it's something that a Jewish person reading this would have said, good, right? He deserves that kind of life and that kind of passing. Really beautiful. So let's keep going. Verse 11 through 17. Now it came to pass after Abraham's death that God blessed his son Isaac, and Isaac dwelt near Beer-Lahai-roi. Now these are the generations of Ishmael, the sons of Abraham, whom Hagar, the Egyptian, the maidservant of Sarah, bore to Abraham. So now we're looking at Ishmael. Now these are the generations of Ishmael, the son of Abraham. Again, these are the names of the sons of Ishmael by their names. So we're going to get a bunch of names, a bunch of different dates. So get ready. Here we go. According to their births, the firstborn was Ishmael, was Nebathai, Kedar, and Abil, and Mibsam, right? Against some doozies. And Mibsba, and Dumah, and Massa, Hadad, Tima. You guys kind of get the role here, right? Lots of different names. These are the sons of Ishmael, and these are their names in their open cities and in their walled cities. 12 princes to their nations, right? So again, 12 being like this fullness, the idea that they are well ordered, right? These are all ideas that go along with 12. 12 tribes, 12 princes, 12 nations. You get it. And these are the years of the lives of Ishmael, 100 years and 30 years and 7 years. And he expired and died and was gathered to his people. So again, not only does Abraham live a full life, Ishmael is going to live a full life too, right? He's going to be 37 years old, and he's going to pass. So he lives a really full life too. He gains the blessing and the promise. His people thrive. Everyone's thriving. The promise that God gave is being fulfilled. That's the idea that the Hebrews are trying to share here. When someone steps out in faith, when someone steps out into the new boldly, right, steps away from home and holds on to the promise that life is going to take place, that good things are going to follow, just hold on. This is the idea here. Hebrews, in the middle of Babylonian captivity, don't give up. Right? These are the blessings that will come. So here we go. Now into verse 18 through 20. Let's go even deeper here. And they dwelt from Havilah to Shur, which borders on Egypt, going towards Ashur. Before all his brothers he dwelt. And these are the generations of Isaac, the son of Abraham. Abraham begot Isaac. So we're moving into this now. And Isaac was 40 years old when he took Rebekah, the daughter of Bethuel, of Aram, and of Padam Aram, the sister of Laban the Aramean, to himself for a wife. So now we move through to Isaac, right? And so Isaac and Rebekah, we move back to the story. 40 years, again, is kind of the beginning. You've hit adulthood. You are gaining wisdom. So we're moving into the place where Isaac now is beginning to experience wisdom, life more abundantly. He's stepping into what it means to be a leader. That's the idea here with 40. So let's continue. And Isaac prayed to the Lord opposite his wife because she was barren. And the Lord accepted his prayer, and Rebekah, his wife, conceived. Now, I know what you're thinking, right? We've heard the story before, right? We've heard the story many, many times. Right? The wife cannot conceive of a son. And so what happens? They pray the prayer. Now notice this for a second though, because this is really rich. Notice Isaac doesn't try to solve the problem himself like his ancestors did. Notice Isaac prays the prayer to the Lord. It's beautiful. Isaac, instead of repeating certain cycles, Isaac in this moment is choosing to not follow another cycle. Now, he's going to choose to fall into other cycles. Of course, we know that through the story. But in this moment, Isaac prays the prayer. He says, God, please let my wife conceive. And what happens? The promise takes place. But it makes me think about cycles here. Israel was in many cycles. Right? They repeated many. And I wonder about us, what cycles, baggage have you been handed down by maybe your parents, by certain cycles you started yourself? What things are you repeating And what things are you choosing not to repeat? This is the question Israel's going through. When we move away from captivity, when we escape Babylon, will we continue to have these same issues pop up over and over again? Or will we learn from them? Will we move through these cycles? It reminds me of a friend. A friend of mine told me their mother is just so angry. And her mother before her, super angry. And there's so much anger in their family. She said, I want to be the kind of person that stops the cycle. She said this, I wrote this down, I think it's beautiful. My mother and her family, and probably her mother before her, all struggled with anger. My mom was a wrecking ball on us kids. This comes from her blog, by the way. We walked on glass constantly. I vowed to never do this with my children. It hasn't been easy, but breaking the cycle is worth the struggle. Israel is being faced with the same decision. They're going to have to ask themselves, are these cycles worth repeating or not? Will we learn or will we repeat? And so Israel in this moment, in the middle of Babylon captivity, they're asking the question. And so in comes the story of the broken Israel that's essentially broken in two. We're going to have these two individuals, Jacob and Esau, come into this story through Isaac, right? And so Jacob and Esau, I love these pictures of these two. They couldn't be any different, could they? Yeah, you've got one very manly, right? Manly, bearded, big, large, very brave looking, tough hunter. And then you have the other side, right? You've got Jacob, who's holding the bowl of soup. He's kind of he's less tough looking. He looks a bit sensitive, slender. You have two very different ways of moving through the world, and so these two are going to be introduced here. So you have Esau. One commentator says Esau is the picture of Israel's enemies, the descendants that went the wrong direction toward war, the ones that took from the land they never gave back, right? This is the group. This is almost a reminder of two individuals we had in the very beginning of Genesis, right? We have Cain and we have Abel. And so many commentators will point out this story is actually being retold through these two now. There are two different ways of living in the world. And so you had Cain, right? Which is another just picture of Esau here. And then, so of course, if Cain if Esau is a reminder of Cain, then of course Jacob is going to be a reminder of Abel, right? And so Jacob is the mixed picture of what Israel could be, but also the broken cycles it struggles with most, the weaker yet promised side. Right? So the divine says, look, if you choose to live in the world and move through with peace, compassion, if you treat people well, if you treat the world well, the environment well, if you treat it well, you will find shalom. But if you simply are there to consume, right, destroy, all of these concepts that fit with Cain and Esau, then oftentimes what comes with it is death, brokenness, decay, broken community. And so two very different ways of functioning in the world. Now, anyone that's done any kind of study about Israel also knows that Israel was a divided kingdom right before Babylon comes and takes Israel. And so if you take time to study that, you'll notice this is a deeper metaphor. These two, Cain and Abel, Esau and Jacob, these two are really deeper metaphors for Israel and Judah. Right? Because at this point in time, right before Babylonians come in and destroy Israel, take the northern kingdom, what takes place is really fascinating because these two were at odds, right? One of them is the younger, one of them's the older. One of them seems stronger. They have more resources. That would be Israel. And yet Israel was the first to fall. And so the conflict that they're referring to has been an old one. This is a conflict that the two have had to kind of struggle with. How will the two brothers, right, get along? Will they bite at each other until both suffer? Well, that's the question that's going to be answered here, right? And so there's a divide, and any Hebrew reading this is going to pick up on this immediately. So let's keep reading. And the children struggled within her. This is within her womb, right? So the children struggled within her and said, "If it be so, why am I like this?" And she went to inquire of the Lord. And the Lord said to her, "Two nations are in your womb, and two kingdoms will separate from your innards. And one kingdom will become mightier than the other kingdom, and the elder will serve the younger." Again, it's a perfect picture of that northern and southern kingdom at that time. And then we get the metaphors, of course, Cain, Abel, Esau, Jacob. The two kingdoms, because they're divided, because they have not figured out how to get along, Hebrew people in general are going to suffer. So again, we know where this is heading, right? We've read this story before. And I started thinking about, as I'm reading this, divided nations, the idea of brokenness and learning how to connect. We live right now in an extremely divided nation, right? I think this is why you asked that question in the very beginning, because we see a very divided nation. According to Tim Pool, there was a study done, and they asked a group of people from both sides, Democrat, Republican. According to Tim Pool, researchers, when they asked this question, they asked, "Would you like a peaceful separation?" Which is kind of scary. 51% of one side said yes. The other side said 54% said we would be in favor of a separation. That was a surprise to me. This idea of separating, people talking about like a civil war, actually preparing for one in some states. I feel like we're just kind of repeating another cycle Israel went through. They're asking, can we get along with two very different ways of ordering the world, right? And if the two different ways are so separate, what keeps us together? Right? What keeps us together? Is there a way for the two to connect? And so both sides of the political aisle seem to find new ways of creating deeper divides. People will follow their tribes to a fault. And so what happened historically between Israel and Judah is that they allowed those differences to create such a divide that it almost created two different classes of Judaism. And it actually almost destroyed their entire nation, until Babylon just takes everyone, right? So question, after we move through Babylon captivity, after we move through the pain, the brokenness, will we stay divided, or will we choose to come together again? This is something they're having to grapple with, because now in captivity, they're back with Israel and Judah. They're just now Jews, right? They're just Hebrew people. They're a conquered nation as a whole. Right? What an interesting thing. Sometimes brokenness, sometimes things that we would call painful, terrible actions, sometimes those are the things that bring people together the most. So for Israel in this moment, they are brought together by pain, by captivity, by brokenness. I saw a picture the other day. I couldn't find the exact one I saw before, but I found this really interesting. Right now in our nation, I saw two different groups come together, and it was almost shocking. There is, of course, a mandate, and there's this proclamation that everyone must be vaccinated. And I don't want to go into political yes you should or no you shouldn't. I'm not your doctor. I'm never going to tell you what I think you should do. You should get medical advice on that one. But what I found interesting was that BLM, Black Lives Matter, and a group of people who are more for bodily autonomy. These two different groups, who are often MAGA people, more far right leaning, and then BLM that is more far left leaning. These two groups came together in a couple different cities, and they actually protested together. And so wherever your belief is on whether you think mandatory vaccinations should or shouldn't happen, not the point I want to share. What I thought was really interesting is two different groups came together, which view the world wildly differently. And yet the two different groups, they came together over an idea. And it was, of course, freedom. And I found that really kind of fascinating. There are times in history where groups of people will come together over an idea. They'll come together and say, even though we have such vastly different views of the world, we're Jewish. And that will hold us together. We are for freedom, and that will bring us together. We are for whatever it is. Oftentimes, in the middle of struggle, it can bring people together. And so right now I'm always searching for that. Where are people coming together? I know where we're divided. That doesn't take much. Watch CNN and Fox. One day you'll see we are divided, right? But there are places where people are coming together. They're having conversations. They're finding ways to live life fully together in a united way. And I think those are the places I've been looking for lately. Let me keep moving through with you because we're not done yet. I am not asking on behalf of them alone, but also on behalf of those who will believe in me through their message, that all of them may be one, as your Father are in me, and I am in you. This is Jesus. I wanted to share this quote from Jesus. This is in John 17:20 through 21. Before Jesus leaves, he gives this command, and I think it's so beautiful. Right? If there's one thing I want to leave with you, it's you should vote Democrat. If there's one thing you need to do, you need to be a Republican or die. No, that's not what Jesus says. He doesn't say that. He says, I want you to learn to be one. Learn to be one, right? As I am one with the Father. And again, interpret that how you will, but it's really beautiful. I have given them the glory you gave me so that they may be one as we are one. I and them and you and me, that they may be perfectly united. This idea is so good, that they may be united. Right? My hope, my promise for them is that they might find a way to come together again. So for Israel, the question was, do we continue down the road toward division, war with those different than us? Or do we find ways to reconcile power and influence? Differing ways of ordering the world, are those going to keep us divided, or are we going to find ways to bring together? So the answer is going to be, there's going to be a struggle either way, right? We're going to seek connection, a united group, but it's going to be a struggle. It always is. And so this story is really about the opening of a struggle. These two brothers are going to have to figure it out, and it's not going to be easy. It's not going to be easy, but the two are going to try to figure it out. Which again, understanding the context now, these two nations, right, that have been divided, this nation of Israel and Judah, they're going to have to figure it out. But the response is, it's going to be a struggle. It's not going to be easy, but we are dedicated to finding shalom, living connection fully with one another. It's going to be a struggle. There's going to be fighting, teeth pulling. It's what brothers do, right? And so what happens when we find ourselves in this place today? That was my thought as I read this, because we're about to step into the struggle, right? So what do? I thought about Jesus' message again. Jesus' message was, there's a way. Right? It's not easy. It's not going to be easy. It's filled with sacrifice. It's filled with struggle. But in the end, our enemies become our friends when we walk the way of Jesus. When we choose to find connection, commonality, when we choose to find shalom, seek that. Our enemies become our friends. The political divide, we begin to realize it's about the people. It's not the politicians. They didn't care about us in the first place, right? We begin to see each other as humans, not blue or red, not BLM or MAGA or whatever the thing is. We begin to see each other as humans, and we come together. But it's going to be tough. It's going to be a struggle. But I would argue, Jesus says it best, it's going to take time, right? The struggle's real, but when we are united, that's when real life begins. That's when the kingdom of heaven opens up. And so this story, for a Jewish person reading it, is so good. They are leaning in because they're asking the question, how do we get there? How does Judah and Israel reconcile? How do we come together out of this struggle as one? So good, right? So how do we take this home? For me, I started asking questions. I thought, how can we find connection in the middle of so much division right now? Because this is happening. Look on Facebook. You don't have to go any further than that, and you will see so much division. So how do we create connection even in the middle of so much division? I'm learning this one. Number one, I'm learning to listen to people's hearts. And I know most of us, when we hear someone say something we disagree with, It causes us to like cross our arms, roll our eyes, argue. But what if we simply look deeper at the heart of the comment, right? I don't have to agree with the comment, but maybe maybe the person's living in a lot of fear, or maybe they just care so deeply about you that they're worried, right? And so learning to accept, okay, they care about me, they're worried about me. I may not agree with the thing they're saying, but I see the heart of the response. Learning that right from the get-go makes someone not an enemy, but a friend, right? Which causes some connection. Number 2, find commonality. Whatever the difference, look for a way to find connection. This comes from a different writers I'm reading right now. It's so beautiful, right? Zen and the Art of Happiness, they talk about this a lot. How do we find community, commonality in community that we disagree with? Find ways to seek connection. So it may be maybe on a political end, but could easily be other connections, right? So how do we find commonality? Where do we find it? I would argue we have more in common than we do difference. Number 3, you don't have to agree, but you can still choose to get along. I really like this idea. End of the day, your views may be different, and being able to say that, it's okay. It's actually essential that we learn to do it. You know what? End of the day, you may lean more this way and I might lean more this way. And that's okay. I don't have to change you. You don't have to change me. We can hold space even though we don't agree on the thing. And that's okay. Number 4, last one, connect on other fields. Right? Connect in other ways. Go to a lake, do fun things together, make bonds that are deeper than political, religious, whatever the differences are. Find ways to see humanity in the person. And that usually takes more than just going to a football game, right? Where you're rooting for the Lions, they're rooting for the Bears. You're a Democrat, they're a Republican, and then you got a libertarian in the middle. You don't have to do with. Go beyond that. Go camping, play some games, do fun things that involve just being human again, where you can laugh and enjoy company together. Do those things, and I would say we begin finding commonality again, connection. Everyone, I hope you enjoy this. This was a lot of fun for me. And again, it was a section of Genesis that typically kind of gets passed quickly, but there is something really beautiful there. And so, as always, please consider going to ethos-church.org/donate. Please work with us there. We're a tax-deductible donation. You can give a tax-deductible donation and partner with us there. And join us online, Living Spaces. We'd love to work and connect there, answer questions, move through together as community. And as always, hit that subscribe button. Hit that subscribe button. Share these videos as often as you can. Can't wait to see you next week when we move through more of this chapter. Yeah, we'll see you next week.